So there I was, trying to learn game development so that I could make my dream game. I thought I was making progress, but the amount to learn was just overwhelming. And the whole time, I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. Tutorials were confusing, and the code I wrote was a total mess, and to make things worse, deep down, I hoped making games could become my job, but at this rate, I knew the chance of that happening was less than none. Thankfully, I've learned a lot since then, and having successfully released 5 small games and a commercial Steam game, there's a lot that I would have done differently that, if you do, could potentially save you years of stress, streamline your learning, and even help you make some money as a game developer in less than a year after starting. And to help you do just that, I made this, the Indie Game Dev Map. We're gonna go on a journey together, you and I. A journey to completely overhaul the way you understand your progress as a game developer. And it all starts with this, the first leg of our journey, which I'm calling Phase 1. Let's go. Oh boy. Well, it seems like we have our first problem. See, most people who try to learn game development are overpackers. They try to cram a ton of knowledge about programming or 3D modeling, but it turns out you're not going to use most of this junk anyway. And if you overpack, then you miss out on all of the important practical knowledge that you gain only by finishing and releasing games. So that gives us the first point on our roadmap. Don't spend more than 1 week learning the basics of programming and the fundamentals of the game engine of your choice. And if you want me to make a dedicated video on just the basic technical skills needed to make your first game, let me know down in the comments, because the last thing I'd want is for you to end up like this guy. I think I got lost in tutorial hell. Maybe I should just go home. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. How am I supposed to learn programming in just 1 week? The bad news is, well, you won't, but the good news is that you won't have to. Most people think that complicated programming is crucial to making games, but that's just not true. In fact, both David Whaley and Thomas Brush, 2 of the most successful indie game developers, both consider themselves to be terrible programmers. In fact, remember how earlier I said that there's a lot that you can only learn by releasing games? That's because if you release games and learn as you go, then not only will your learning work for you, but more importantly, you'll learn from your mistakes and you'll get much more efficient than if you try to make your dream game right away. That's why the secret to Phase 1 is to mimic the release process for a game, but do it on a very small scale. In other words, the next point on our roadmap is to spend a few weeks just making super simple small games and releasing them on itch.io. And before you go worrying about how this will take all your time away from making your dream game, just remember that your dream game is a big project and it will take a very long time to make. It's okay to spare a few weeks just to learn, and it'll barely take a dent out of the process. Now, a huge problem people run into at this stage, which I ran into when I first tried making a small game, was that I didn't actually know what a small game was. I assumed a 2D game would be simpler than my open world RPG, but it still took me months to get a prototype going. But it turns out that you don't really need to stress about coming up with a bunch of game ideas, because there's a really easy way to get inspired with super creative, simple game ideas that you can confidently make in just 1 weekend. If you go on itch.io, you can look up games that were made for game jam competitions where devs try making a complete game in 3 days or sometimes a week. Here's some games from a jam that I ran a few months ago. All of these were made in 1 weekend and they're super creative, so there's a ton to get inspired by. But if you're up to the challenge, I highly recommend participating in a game jam yourself at this stage. There are always a bunch going on. After about a month with a few small crappy games released, you've gotten decent at using your engine, you have a basic understanding of game design, and you've probably gotten your first negative comment on one of your games. Which means you're now ready for Phase 2 of our journey. At this stage, I want you to start paying close attention to how you felt when you were making those small games. Certain things you did will have felt tedious and boring, while other things will feel challenging and fun. Now, there's no point spending tons of time on something you hate doing, especially because, in all honesty, there's just no guarantee that you're going to make any money off of indie games, which is why the secret to Phase 2 is to go all in on those things that you found interesting and fun while making your small games. But you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone here, because specializing will also help you with the financial side of things too, which we'll get to in Phase 3. So if you like programming, practice making more complicated mechanics. If you like storytelling, make investigative walking simulators. If you like art, orient your game around the visuals and get creative. It's important to note that financial gain is never a guarantee in the indie dev industry, and it's probably just going to get harder and harder. But at the same time, it would be really nice to be able to make some money off of our games and of all of our hard work, and eventually maybe even earn a living doing what you love. Which is why for Phase 2, the big midpoint of our journey, we only have one stop, which is release a polished, complete game on itch.io as if it was a fully commercial project, but give yourself a deadline of just 1 month to complete it. For this project, you'll be creating a trailer, a main menu, learn about game feel, post GIFs on Twitter and Reddit, and go through all the marketing motions. And even if you don't like the idea of marketing, the truth is this is a great way to get feedback for your game while you make it. Once you get your game out on itch.io, I highly recommend doing this a few more times because then you'll build up a good reputation and maybe even a small audience. But if you feel ready, it's time to finally move on to phase 3. There's one more spot here before the final goal. And before I tell you what it is, we need to talk about a huge problem that most indie devs run into at this stage, that I ran into, that if you don't avoid could totally kill your progress and take you all the way back to phase 0. See, once you make a few small games, it's really easy to get too ambitious and to run into scope creep. So if you're going to be putting a game up on Steam, then everything that you learned about game design, management, and controlling scope are going to be more important now than ever before. And that's exactly what the goal of phase 3 is: getting your first highly polished game up on Steam in a reasonable time frame and making some money off of your hard work for the first time. So it turns out I missed the exit at Finish a Polished Game Road, then I missed the next 50 exits, and now I'm literally in Alberta. And I have no gas. I mean budget. Overscoping your game at this stage is so dangerous because you're putting in more effort than it'll actually be worth, because your first game honestly probably won't make that much money. So while other Anshe tries to hitchhike back to Saskatchewan, I'm going to show you 3 easy ways to make money as a game developer at this early stage. First of all, since you're already working on a game, you're going to be writing lots of code, creating content, and making systems, so why not package them and sell them as assets on the Unity Asset Store? So I wrote this before the whole Unity pricing fiasco. It makes complete sense if you want to avoid all things Unity at this point. This is just one option. In the end, you have to make these judgment calls as you gain experience, but don't worry because there are always alternative options, like alternatively, you could sell assets on Patreon, or maybe even use Patreon to give your followers that you started gaining in phase 2 access to early builds of your exciting new game. Another great idea would be to share your new expertise with others, selling Udemy courses about the skills that you specialized in during phase 2. You could also do what I do, but be warned, YouTube is very time consuming, and you don't really get anything out of ad revenue. My strategy is basically to put some exclusive resources up on Patreon and also get people to sign up for my email list, where I send them a bunch of free stuff and then eventually offer them paid content, which is mutually beneficial. So if you're finding this video helpful, consider supporting the channel on Patreon, or if you'd prefer, grab my free indie game starter guide in the description. See what I did there? So we dipped our toes into the world of Steam, and after less than a year, we're already starting to make some money and release real games. But the road to get there will be long, and there will be plenty of opportunities for mistakes. And even making simple games will pose its challenges, to the point where there will be times where you feel like quitting. I've been there plenty of times, so to make sure that you avoid as many of these mistakes as possible, make sure you watch this video next, where I talk all about these mistakes and give you precise solutions on how to avoid them and make sure you don't fall into them too. Thanks so much for watching, and God bless. Hang on, what's this? Huh, X marks the spot. Well, guess that means I better start making my dream game.